All right, we're back. This is video number 3, and we're going to go over this part of the screen so that we can get through the end tool shelf, turn on my screencast keys again, and the snap tools up here, also overlays, and the object collection here, and then the properties area over here on the right hand side. But first we need something to work on, so I will give us a cube. Now over here on the top, you have things that you do not usually need to work with, but sometimes you do. For example, this one here is the transform orientations dropdown. And from here, you can work with either the global coordinate system, that would mean X, Y, and Z, that you can see right here. But you can also turn on a local transformations, and that is going to be connected to the object that you're working on. So that if you were to rotate this like so, and then you were to turn on local coordinates, then this edge here would be your X coordinate, and this would be your Y coordinate, and the Z would be pointing perpendicular to this face up here. Now, what I'm saying is that this is possible. I'm not saying that you would want to use this very often, because when you use this non-global transform orientation, it's actually quite hard to get things to align properly and to extrude in a certain direction that you want to work with. So usually you want to have it just on global, like so. The next one here is a transform pivot point, and this is actually important. Usually, if you don't mess with this list here, your objects are going to pivot around your origin, which is right here. But the thing is that you can move your pivot point to the 3D cursor. And now if I rotate this cube, it's going to rotate around this point in space. So it has nothing to do with the object anymore. It's rotating all over the place. And sometimes this is useful. But then again, if you want to rotate around individual origins, then you do that and it will rotate in here. And if you had two of those boxes like so, and you rotate it like that, and select them both and say individual origins, you are going to rotate them both the same amount around the same axis, but they rotate independently. They rotate together, but independently. Also, if you now turn on the 3D cursor, they will rotate as a unit around the 3D cursor. And if you now turn on median point, they are going to rotate around the point that is exactly midway between the respective origins of these two objects. And if you say around the active element, then we are going to rotate everything around the pivot point of the active element, which happens to be the origin of the right-hand cube. Also, bounding box center means that you have an imaginary box around the objects. Let's add one more, a sphere, and move it here. Select all three of these, and then rotate around the bounding box center. It's going to build an imaginary box around the three objects and rotate them around that center point. This is, again, sometimes useful, but it's not something that I edit every day. Sometimes I need to do that, but not always. I'll just delete. Well, back to the original situation, like so. The next one is called snap. And in the snap you have a lot of different options to which you will be snapping your objects. And I will be going through these in detail in a later video, but already now you can see that you can snap to the grid, you can snap to an individual vertex, edge, or face, or to a volume, or the center of an edge, or a perpendicular to the nearest point on the edge. You also can align rotation to the target, so that if you have an object that has been rotated like so, actually I'm not sure how it works, but I will rotate that like so. And then if I snap this to another object, turn on snap, and I say align rotation to the target, and then I will snap it here. No, it doesn't work like that. I'll have to look into this, but I know that this object is going to get its rotation aligned with the target object, and sometimes that is very useful. So you also can have an increment of rotation so that your object will rotate with a set of 5 or 15 degrees. You can put in 15 degrees if you want, and after that your object will rotate with 15 degrees increments. I'll go back to the previous one again because this is easier to show with that. So let's say that I have this cube in here and I want to subdivide it. I go to my modifiers, and in the modifiers I will find subdivision surface, and let's see if my Blender crashes. No, actually I don't want to do it this way. Let me do it in another way. It's much more easy to explain. I will add a few loop rings like so, and add a few loop rings like so. And now I have a lot of vertices on the face of my object, because this one here is proportional editing. Usually if I take a face and I drag it up, it is going to do this. It's only going to move the face that I was pulling up, and all the others will remain in place. However, here we have proportional editing, and I will turn on proportional editing and select the smooth. And now when I move my selected face, it's going to make a smooth transformation for the nearest faces to it. I'll go back and I'll take the next one, a sphere. This is going to be a spherical lift. You can see that it's almost like a sphere. The more faces you have, the more even the result of proportional editing is going to be. And the root looks like this. It's almost the same as the sphere, but it's slightly different. Then we have inverse square, and I'd say GZ. This looks like a parabolic curve. The next one is a sharp, GZ, and that's how it looks. The original part looks sharp, but the others are, proportionally lifted as I lift the top face. There's a linear, and this is going to be, there's the similar amount of lift on all of those vertices. You can see it's almost like a cone. And then we have a constant GZ, and it is the same amount for all of the faces around it. And there's also the size of the proportion, how big the area is that it's going to move. Now it's much smaller. And the last one is a random, and this is very nice if you need to, for some reason, if you need to like create terrain or something, and you select a few faces around here, and then you say G and Z, and they will all move. There's a random effect to your moves, and I can turn it off merely by clicking on this button here, just like you can turn on your snap with this one. And then we come to the right hand side, and the first one we have in here is selectability and visibility. If you do not want to be able to select the camera, for example, you can turn off its visibility. Now it's no longer seen on the scene, and if you put it back, you can see it appear on the left, but you cannot move it now. You cannot even select it. So when you turn on selectability, then you can select the camera again. And this applies to all the different parts of the scene that you can have. Sometimes useful, not an everyday tool, but anyway. The next one is about the gizmo. So you can see that the gizmo is actually this one. This is the gizmo, and you can turn it on and off merely by clicking here. But if you want to edit it further, you can have all these settings available for you. Again, I haven't used this that much, but I know that it's there if I need them. And then we have viewport overlays. And this is, again, something that is pretty useful, because if you don't want to have the axis, you can turn them on and off like this. Now you can have the Z axis if you like that all three to be present. And you can turn off the floor. I don't know why you would want to do that, because it's really hard to see after that what's happening on your scene. And you can turn on bones and extras and all that stuff that is sometimes used but not very often. The thing that is most important is that when you go from object mode into edit mode, your overlays will have a new option for you. So I'm now in object mode and I don't have an extra here in the overlays, but when I go into edit mode, I can see mesh edit mode overlays. And from here, you can turn on the edge length. And this is good because now you can measure the actual sizes of your mesh, like the edge length and the face area. If you turn on the face area, you will see that it's this many in square meters. And again, this is sometimes useful and sometimes not that useful, but you need to know where to turn it on if you have to get access, if you have to have access to the edge lengths. So you go into edit mode and it's right here in the mesh edit mode overlays. The next buttons here are the X-ray, toggle the X-ray. This is the same as hitting the Z key and turning on wireframe or solid. These are your two different versions. And then you can turn it on from here as well. Now that it's selected, you can go into edit mode and go into the X-ray. And then you have your viewport shading solid, and this means that your object has no color, but it looks like a real object. And then in here, you have your material preview. When you have a material selected for this object, you would not see anything if you are in the solid view, but as soon as you go into material, you will see it. Just to prove the point, I will make a quick material for this. I will make it into a blue cube merely by clicking here. And as soon as I go into the solid, I don't see the color anymore. I have to go into the material preview to actually see it. And the last one is viewport shading rendered, and this will show you how your object is going to look when it's rendered. So you can see that if you go very close to it, you can use the lamp to see how the object is going to look when you render it. If I just hit F12 now, it will make a quick render, and of course it doesn't show much more than a cube suspended in a gray world, but this is your render result anyway. Usually you want to work with your viewport setting set at solid. Sometimes you need to have the X-ray so that you can see other things that are behind your object. And sometimes you want to have the colors, and sometimes you want to have the rendered. It all depends on what you need to do. These buttons here are part of the gizmo. This, if you press down here, you can zoom up and down. Press down here, it will move the scene. Press down here, it will go into the camera view. And click down here, it will make you the isometric view so that all the angles are at 90 degrees. And this is the perspective view that you usually want to have. But sometimes you need to have this. So if you make a copy of it and move it on the x-axis, Shift D, X, Shift D, X, you can see how it's isometrically, it's the same size. And if you go away from the isometric view or orthographic projection, then you can see that it appears to be smaller as you move it further away. So these were these parts, and in here, if you press the N key, you will have the N toolbar, tools shelf. The tool shelf here will tell you the location of your object. Currently, this object is 18 meters away from the center, and this one here is 0, 0, 0. And the rotation of the object, if I rotate like this, you can see that it's like rotate around the set. You can see that you can have your object rotation here. And unless you do a Control A and apply your transformations, you can always come back to 0, 0, 0 by doing this with the settings. You have scale, and if you lock them all, you can then have it so that it's the editing of the scale is locked. Usually it's unlocked, and you can make 1.5 out of all of these, and it will be 1.5 times bigger than what it was. But if you don't say anything about the axis, then you can just say scale 1.5 and it will be done the same way. So select the object, scale 1.5. And now my lamp is inside the cube. I'll just move it on the Z axis. And that's how you do your scales. The next one is the tools, and this one will help you with your selection. View will make things work with your camera. So if you go to the camera view and you lock your camera to the view, then your camera is going to move away from the object when you use your scroll wheel. But if it's not locked to the camera, then it's going to move the entire view outside the camera, so that your camera view is going to be still the same. If I now press F12 to get a quick render of this, you can see that I have a cube looking like this. But if I turn on lock camera to view and then go away and then press F12, you can see that the cube now fits the render window. So this is actually a very useful tool for you. You can also lock your camera to the 3D cursor, but that is not as useful as this one. The clip and the end, these have to do with what your camera actually sees. But we will discuss these later when we get to the camera parts. You don't have the screencast keys, but I do. But then if you were to install the 3D toolbox, for example, for 3D printing, then it would appear here as an add-on to your toolbar, tool shelf. And again, the tool shelf will move if you are in object mode or if you are in edit mode. So be prepared to not finding your things in here if you are not selected. If you haven't selected your object before you do this, then your item is going to look different. All right. Next, we are going to see. Turn off the camera view. Yep. Over here we have the scene collection, and every time you add something, like I have this cube in here, and then I added another cube. Its name is cube 01. You should get to the habit of renaming everything you add to the scene. If you were to make this into a table, then you would name this a table. And if you were to make this one into a chair, then you would call it chair as soon as you have made it. Because otherwise you will have all those cube 01, 02, 03s over there, and they're not really useful for anything. So you don't want to wind up in a situation where you have a million cubes and they're all numbered. That's not a very good idea. Down here we have the properties area. And if you go and oh, by the way, this is something I have to say. All of these things on the screen are actually windows. And you can turn the type of the window any one you like from here. So if you want to make a custom workspace, you can click in here to get the custom workspace, like so. It's called layout 001 now. And now you can change your views to be anything you need. But of course, what I'm saying is that this is not probably a very good idea, but it's something you can do. And now this is the layout 01, which you can also use so that you can go from the regular layout into layout 01 for your special purposes. And then you can use the others as well as you are using this one here. So, but when you don't need it anymore, just right click and say delete. And after that, your workspace is back to regular. And then over here in the properties area, we have a different set of tools for your use. Again, these are multiple, and whenever you pick one of them, you can see that all of these turn on, and there are a million things you can change. I wouldn't worry about these at all because they are already preset so that this works fine. And only when you know what you're doing, then you can go and change whatever you have to change. But if you go through the list, I'll show you what we have in here. The first one here is a active tool for the workspace settings, so you can set your different settings if you want to, but again, these are not very useful. The next one then is a lot more important because this is the scene settings. And first of all, you have the render engine. You have three different options for your rendering engine. You have the Eevee, which is what I've been using now, which is a fantastic overall tool for making quick but still good looking renderings. It's slightly slower than the workbench, but the workbench, this isn't half as good in making anything. Very nice, and that's why we usually use Eevee. And then because it's already capable of making real-time visualizations of changing lights, for example. It's not as good as Cycles, but Cycles is like slower. You can see how it takes a lot longer to calculate the result of the change of the move. And when I leave it there, then it will do a couple of these calculation cycles, and then it will give you a nice image. And this is good if you can use a graphics card, if you have an NVIDIA graphics card, then you can turn on your GPU compute and then it's gonna calculate a lot faster no matter what you're doing. But if you don't have it, like that's the case with my laptop, of course, I have to use the central processing unit, and that is not as quick and as beautiful as cycles when you are using the graphics card to do your calculations. All of these will be gone through in detail later, so we don't need to worry about that too much. Just turn on your EV and then leave all the others as they are, and you have almost everything is renderable that way. This one is your format. When you render, this is the size of the image you want to make, the aspect ratio, and if you are doing animations that have 4,000 frames in them, then you have to move, put the 4,000 here into the end frames. But if you are doing just a regular image, then you don't have to do that. This is where you pick your file format. You can make a BMP, PNG, JPEG, Targa, RAW, or if you want to make a movie, you can pick FFmpeg video. And after that, of course, you have access to all this video specific stuff that is in here. So this one has to be edited somehow. And then this is your layer. So up in here, by the way, you can see that you have a view layer. But you could also have a render layer, and that would mean a set of settings that would apply only at a render time. But now that we only have a view layer, we can use the same layer for rendering, and we can set a lot of different settings, whether you want to have mist or whether you want to have highly specular light and color. You can turn it all on and off in here. Again, something that you don't have to edit if you don't know what you're doing. The next one is scene properties. This is where you set your units. You can have metric or imperial, degrees, meters, kilograms, seconds, and Kelvin. You have to remember that Blender is able to do physics. It's able to do all kinds of gravity related stuff, and it's able to simulate wind. And for it to work properly and deliver nice results, then you have to set these so that they actually are in conformity to each other and turn on gravity, for example. And this is what you set up in the scene values here. Next one is the word properties, where you can turn on your different shaders, and you can also adjust many different things that have to do with your viewport settings. But again, something that this is not edited on a regular basis, only when you need to do something like this. Collectors are related to this object area here. So you can set different values for your collections. And then you have your object values. This is the location. This is basically the same as you have in here, but it's added with some extra options. For example, if you have a parent-child relationship set up for this object, this is where you can see that. You can add it to any collection from here. An instance means that you have a single object, but you can have multiple copies of the objects, but they don't take up any memory because they are not real objects. They are just instances of that primary object. Modifiers, these are a very important set of tools because you can do, for example, you can do booleans with your objects. Let me quickly make a ball, a UV sphere, and then I turn on the normal view, move it inside here so that it's actually inside my object. And now if I have to use the Control A to all transforms, and this one all transforms. Now if I take the modifier and I make a Boolean modifier and I pick the sphere, as the modifier and I apply the modifier, you will see that my ball has been deducted from the cube. So this is just one example of the modifiers, of which we have many, and we will go through these in some detail later, but it's a really powerful set of tools. The next one is a particle system. If you wanted to do some physics, or if you wanted to make a rug on the floor that would have, hair, strands of hair, then you can add a particle system to the object that is your rug, and you can make any type of hair system with the physics layout in here. And so all the other physics modifiers are down here, where you can set up your soft body properties. For example, if you wanted to have a soft object falling on a hard object, you could simulate how it's going to be transformed when it hits the hard object. Or you can turn this into a collision object, and it will take any object falling on it and then act in a certain way. You can have fluids, or you can have dynamic paint, or you can have rigid body constraints, where you will tell other objects how to act when they meet this one, when they actually run into this object here. Constraints, these mean that you can set an object as a parent for another object, so that if this object turns, this object here will copy the rotation or the location or scale or all transforms, just like that they actually copy everything. When this one moves, then this one will do the same movements, and this is sometimes very useful. You can also for example, you can attach a camera to this object, so when this object moves, the camera will automatically follow this, and if you set this to move along a curve, then the camera will track the location of the object, and you can have a nice, like a chase object coming after your moving object here. You can copy the object properties from some other object, and then you also have these camera settings in which you can set your different types. You can set your focal length to be 50, this is the basic camera lens. But if you have a tele lens or a macro lens, then you can change the focal length of your object, of your camera, so that it actually mimics a real world camera. And what else? The last, over here, because I was with the camera, you have a different set of settings, but when you are back on your object, then you can see what comes after the object constraints. The data means that you can open your object and you can set, let's say that I want to maintain these faces for some reason. I want to be able to select these faces really quickly. To do that, I can create a vertex group and call it like my faces, and I will assign that group to these vertices now. And I can now deselect it, and I can select it again by merely clicking on this select and deselect. This is sometimes very useful when you have a set of vertices that you have to be able to select really quickly and accurately. Create a vertex group out of them, and it's very easy for you to do. And the last couple of items in here are the material. The material, you can either have a base color on the object. You need to remember to turn on the viewport shading for material preview. Or if you don't want to use a base color, you can use any texture. Like you can have a brick texture. Looks like that. It actually looks like a brick wall straight off the package. And you can make it look as like it as you like. You can change the colors so that it's like a reddish color, and some of them could be like dark. And as you can see, there are a lot of different settings that you can use for any of these material settings, but just so that you know that making a basic texture is very easy. Gradient texture, this goes from black to white, for example, and we can have a magic texture. Don't know why it's called magic, but this is actually a very nice base for other materials. And we could have a checker texture so that we would have a white and red checker texture. And while we are here, we have to say a word about the shaders. The shading models of that Blender uses means that you can have different presets for your objects as how they look. Usually you want to use principled BSDF. Sometimes you want to make it look glossy. And when it's glossy and you do the checker texture again, then you can see that it's actually, where's my lamp? There. It's actually glossy. You can see that it reflects light. And sometimes you want to make it look like glass. And if you do the settings properly, then this would actually be like a glass object, and you could put your lamp inside your object. Now you can see how it's actually the light is passing through the object, and if you render this, it looks rather nice. There's a lot of these different shaders, and you have to figure out how to use them. This is translucent, so it's not like glass, but it still lets the light pass through the object. And this is a subject of a different video. We're going to go through all of these and make you understand how to pick the proper shader. But for most of the time, you want to use principled BDSF because that's the basic shader that we want to use. And the last thing you have on this side of the properties is the texture. You can actually have a base texture from here. Let's say I want to add a Voronoi texture, and this one can be either color or it can be black and white, but let's leave it as it does now. But if you have another type of texture, you can go in here and add a texture by clicking on new, and you can have different types of textures straight off from here, like clouds, for example. And then you can go into your shading workspace and attach this texture to your material so that the cube would actually have this sort of material on it. So this would be the content of this video, and there will be more for you to watch, and see you in video 4.